These are the practice problems for Unit 2, Lesson 9. Question 1 says a kite is a quadrilateral which has two sides next to each other that are congruent, while the other two sides are also congruent. You can see by the hash marks here that side XW is congruent to side ZW and side XY is congruent to side ZY. Given kite WXYZ, show that at least one of the diagonals of a kite decomposes the kite into two congruent triangles. Draw the diagonal on the image, then explain your reasoning below. So what we're going to do first is draw a diagonal. Now we have two options for a diagonal. This would be one of the diagonals. And clearly this diagonal is not going to divide the kite into two congruent triangles, so we're not going to use that one. So let's try the other diagonal. All right, so when we do that one, we can see that we now have two congruent triangles. And if we're going to prove that, we have to find a theorem that proves the two triangles are congruent. Since so what we're looking for is side, 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 angle, those sorts of things, right? So when we're looking at this, we can see we already have two sets of congruent sides. And then this third side is the one we just drew. That is congruent to itself. So when we say that a side is congruent to itself, that is the reflexive property. So you can say segment segment WY is congruent to itself, and that is the reflexive property. Reflexive property just means something is congruent to itself. Why do we have to say that? Because it's part of both triangles. So now that we have three sides, side 1, side 2, and side 3, we can say that the triangles are congruent. The triangles are congruent by the side, side, side triangle theorem. All right. If you submit an answer here, you'll get that written out for you in words. Okay, here's question 2. It says that Mai has proven that triangle WYZ is congruent to triangle WYX using the side, side, side triangle congruence theorem. That's very similar to what we just did on slide 1. Why can she now conclude that diagonal WY bisects both angles ZWX and ZYX? So those two angles that we're talking about are this angle and this angle. And they're saying, why can we conclude that this segment bisects both of these angles? And the way we conclude that is, since we know that both triangles are congruent by the SAS or SSS theorem, we also know that we can use CP/CTC, because once you prove the triangles are congruent, once you prove the triangles are congruent, you can always use this congruent parts of congruent triangles are congruent to say that a specific part of one triangle is congruent to another part. So if I know that this is congruent to this, and this is congruent to this, then that means WY has to bisect both of those angles. So if we were to write all that out, we would say angle ZWY is congruent to angle XWY using CP/CTC, and we would say the same thing about the bottom two angles. Angle ZYW is congruent to angle XYW using CP/CTC. And if you write your answer in here and then hit submit, it will give you a nice written explanation of that. All right, practice question number 3. We have the same image, but it says YXWZ is a kite. Now it's going to give us a degree measure. of each one. So it says angle WXY has a measure of 133 degrees. So let's go ahead and label that first. That's always the first thing you should do. So this WXY is 133 degrees. And then it says ZWX has a measure of 60 degrees. So we can change our color. ZWX has a measure of 60 degrees. So that's going to be that whole angle there. Then it says find the measure of angle ZYW. So let's go ahead and label that one ZYW. And that's going to be just half of this angle right here. This is ZYW. So just make sure you're really specific when you're measuring the angles to see what you're actually looking for. So since we know that WY is the bisector, and we know that this angle ZWX is 60 degrees, we know that each one of these smaller angles up here has to be 30 degrees, right? So this one is 30 degrees and this one is 30 degrees, these two. Then we have to determine what this angle is, X. Since we know 2 on the right side, we can determine what this one is down here. So we can say 30 plus 133 equals 163 degrees. We know the whole triangle needs to be 180 degrees. So then we'll just say 180 minus 163. You can do that on your calculator. That will give us 17 degrees. So 17 degrees is going to be this angle right here. And if we know that that one is 17 degrees, then we know that this one that we were looking for here is also 17 degrees. So the answer here would be 17 degrees. This is the final practice problem, and we have a proof that we're going to complete. We have a list of statements and reasons. We need to fill in the missing components of the statements and the reasons. So the first one is fairly simple because the reason is given. So whenever we see that, all we have to do is then fill in the statements that were already given to us. In this case, we have segment KE is congruent to segment TE, and segment KI is congruent to segment TI. Now, in this case, they're already marked with little tags on the image, so we don't have to do that. Then the second statement, it tells us the reason is the reflexive property. So we can use that clue to know that they're talking about something being equal to itself, either an angle or a segment. In this case, since we have 2 sides, we know that this third side, segment EI, is going to be equal to itself, because it's the same segment. So that's what we're going to put for statement 2. Statement 3 is given to us. Triangle EKI is congruent to triangle ETI. And the reason for that, we know, since we have 3 sides marked, the reason has to be the side, side, side triangle congruence theorem. So we'll fill in SSS. And usually after you have a triangle congruence theorem, the next step is going to be portions of the triangle being equal to each other. So the next statement says angle KEI is congruent to TEI and KIE is congruent to TIE. And of course we know that that is CPCTC. That's what you're going to see all the time after you have a triangle congruence. If the triangle congruence is in the middle of the proof and not what you're trying to prove, then a lot of times CPCTC will follow. And then the very last statement is always going to be whatever you're trying to prove. So we're trying to prove that segment EI is the angle bisector of angle KET and KIT. And that is it. That is all you have to do to finish practice problem number, well, whichever the last practice problem is. All right. Have a great day.